So I want to start with a story today. Some of you guys might know some of it. Some of you guys might not, depending on what your background is. But thousands of years ago, there was this guy named Joshua. And Joshua is interesting. He comes right on the back of some of the most famous stories in the Bible. Even people who don't really have read the Bible, most of them still have kind of a cursory understanding, especially of one character known as Moses, right? Most people, even if you never read the Bible, you know who Moses is because there have been so many stories about Moses, right? His whole story of going in and taking the people of God out of Egyptian slavery, taking them across, right, the parting the Red Sea, and then going out towards the promised land. And most of us kind of know those stories. But on the backside of that comes a new leader over top of the people of God, the people of Israel, and his name is Joshua. Moses, as he was working through this whole leadership thing of taking these people out, he had his brother who was named Aaron. But then there was this other young man who seemed to be his protege. In fact, when they had this time where they were going to go into the promised land to spy on it, Joshua was one of the spies that he sent out. He means he's a younger man at the time who snuck in and explored the area. And fascinatingly enough, Joshua stood out in the fact that him and another guy named Caleb were the only two spies who came back and said, "The Lord has given us this land, let's go and take it." Everyone else was so terrified by the people who were there, they said, "We think we should just hold back. That seems like way too much hard work to defeat those people and take that land." In fact, God actually had them wander around in the desert. This is interesting to think about. Wander around in the desert until that entire generation of like Moses, Aaron, and then Joshua and Caleb, until everybody else in that generation died, until all that was left was literally these two men from that generation, Joshua and Caleb. And Joshua was tapped by Moses as being the leader after he stayed back. They were going into the promised land. Moses actually never went into the promised land, fascinatingly enough. And instead, he basically put his mantle of authority on top of Joshua and said, "No, you are going to go and lead this nation." And as much as Moses was like the liberator who took them out of it, Joshua is like the commander king. He's like the general. He takes the people into the promised land, and thus begins a season of war, basically, where God says, "These people, I've tried to reach out to them for generations and generations. They are evil and vile in their practices." Literally, they would take their children who they would have, and they would place them on a scalding iron in the hands of Baal, and they would melt them alive as people played bands, they played songs, and they would dance around to worship their evil gods. And God said, "I have reached out to these people and they are completely against everything that I say is right. I have tried to reach them with my love and they have refused. So now here's what I need you to do." And this is a really strange time in biblical history. He said, "I want you to go and declare war, and I want you to defeat these evil people, displace them from the land. And instead, I want you to create a space in which I am honored as God." Pretty fascinating in all reality. And in this season where he is this general king kind of leader over top of them, right? There's this interesting story where these Gibeonites, they were kind of like one of the tribes in the area who really should have been displaced as well. They tricked him into believing that they were from a far off land, and they said, "Would you sign like a peace treaty with us?" And Joshua actually did. He said, "Yes, I'll sign a peace treaty with you." And the treaty was, we're kind of a small nation. We refuse to ever attack the people of God, but if we ever find ourselves in trouble, you need to come to our rescue as well. And Joshua said, "Okay, so be it." So they end up signing that. Well, very, very shortly after that promise comes due. In fact, all of a sudden, someone runs up and they tell them, "Hey, the other surrounding nations, 5 different kingdoms have come together to destroy us. They've declared war on us, and you promised you would show up and you would have our back." And Joshua rushes to this situation with his men, and the story is absolutely amazing. I want to jump right into it. We'll go back, but I'm just going to jump directly to the action scene, right? Does anyone have like a favorite movie as like, I mean, it could be a woman too, but a guy, like an action movie, and you skip all that stupid like character building stuff at the beginning, right? You're just like forward chapter, guns. That was what I came here for, right? Anybody? Just me, right? Okay, yeah, right. You're like, I just was looking for that cool gunfight. That's all I wanted to see. We're going to jump right into this moment, Joshua 10 through 14. It says this, okay? As they start this battle with these other nations, okay, of the Amorites, it says this. the Lord threw them into a panic. And that's what he's talking about, their enemy, the Amorites, okay? And the Israelites slaughtered great numbers of them at Gibeon. Then the Israelites chased the enemy along the road to Beth Horon, killing them all along the way to Azekah and Makkedah. As the Amorites retreated down the road from Beth Horon, check this out, the Lord destroyed them with a terrible hailstorm from heaven that continued until they reached Azekah. The hail actually killed more of the enemies than the Israelites killed with the sword. This is like crazy. They start this battle, they start this war, they start to defeat them. The enemy starts to run away, and all of a sudden the clouds roll in, and these giant boulders of hail come crashing down out of the sky and just start pelting and killing the animals and the horses and the people who are fleeing. And God is literally fighting in two different ways, supernaturally and physically at the same time. And it says this, on the day the Lord gave the Israelites victory over the Amorites, Joshua prayed to the Lord in front of all of the people of Israel. In front of all of the people of Israel, get this, it's almost like this moment where all of them are in battle, and maybe there's this interesting pause as they're running and the hailstorm is coming, and Joshua stands up and he shouts loud enough that the entire army hears him, and he screams out this fascinating prayer. He says this, let the sun stand still over Gibeon, and the moon over the valley of Ajalon. And then get this, it says in verse 13, so the sun stood still, and the moon stayed in place until the nation of Israel had defeated its enemies. Is this event not recorded in the book of Jashar? The writer who wrote this in Joshua, he said there's actually other books that aren't even in the Bible that they actually recorded there was a miracle on this day. It says the sun stayed in the middle of the sky and it did not set as on a normal day. Other translations, the way they say this is, it did not set for another day. Like it just stayed and hung there for another 24 hours and then picked up where it left off the next day and settled down. It says this, if you're like, that seems impossible, you're correct. Read verse 14. There has never been a day like this one before or since. You're like, that one seems really, really hard to believe. You're like, right. God literally says it's never happened before this day. It's never happened since this day. This is a one-off. When the Lord answered such a prayer, surely the Lord fought for Israel that day. It's an amazing story, right? I remember reading one of these stories for the first time like that, and I was just thinking, wow, how amazing is that prayer of Joshua, right? I mean, like, what? Like, who would have thought in that moment to just like, to call out, hey, son, stop. Like, and it's not like it's happened before. They said like it's never even happened before. Like he's literally asking for something that has never happened. It is beyond miraculous. I mean, realistically, right? The planetary reality of what had to happen to make this happen in real life, I don't even fathom what happened to the universe, okay? I don't even understand. I don't know. I don't know what happened if everyone else in the world was paused and there was a microcosm dome over top of this war. Everyone else is just for 24 hours. You've all seen those favorite movies, right? Where there's like a dome and they fought and then it picked up and no one knew, right? I have no idea what happened. It was the other side of the planet. Was there actually the sun there? Did the other side of the planet have like some crazy polar shift, right? And like that's how, I don't know, like a whole bunch of animals went extinct because it froze. I don't even know, right? Who knows what happened in this moment? But I think, wow, what an astounding prayer. How many of you would love to see something that miraculous happen in your life? How many of you? You go like, in my life, I would love to see something. Is that really it? You don't care? For real? No, for real, respond. How many of you would like to see something that miraculous happen in your life? Where you would say like, I would love to see something like world-changingly insane happen in my life where I would stand there in awe. I mean, can you imagine what this did for Joshua for the rest of the time that he was the army? Like he was the commander? They're like, I don't know, Joshua. I don't know if we got this. And he's like, seen the sun stand still, bro. Like, this one's not that bad, right? I mean, I'm sure it did so much for his faith. And I think for us, that's what we think. We think, man, I would love to see something like the sun stand still, where my faith would just have this moment where I would be like, I know, because I have seen God do the miraculous, right? This miraculous moment of provision. I think all of us would love to have this moment in our life. But I need you to get this, because I pray that it's the case. I really do. I pray that every single one of us get to experience God in such a way that we would have a moment we could hang our hat on metaphorically in our faith. A moment that we would go back to and say, I know that I know. I've seen too much. I've witnessed his mercy. I've witnessed him do something so miraculous that I know that he's real. But this is my thought as I was thinking about that moment. I realized this. Those defining moments in our life, we want that defining faith moment. It's really interesting because before that moment, preceding every one of these giant faith moments that we tell stories about, that the Bible tells stories about, there is another moment of actually even greater importance. And we can zip right past it without even noticing it. Before every one of these great moments of faith, these great moments that we hang our hat on, just a little bit before that, there's another moment. I call it the moment before the moment. Because really, you tell the story about the moment, but if I may, the reason why this one is so important is what you do in this moment beforehand determines the outcome of what's going to happen in that moment you're going to tell the story about. And if we don't know this, we'll walk past them. We won't recognize them. But every one of these stories has a moment before the moment where it's the cause, it's the foundation of what happens in that great moment. You want that great moment. I need you to there's a moment before that great moment you're looking for, and you need to be able to spot it so that you can make sure you make the right decision. Joshua had this moment. I'll show you what it is. It's literally just right before this story. It says this in Joshua 10, 6 through 9, okay? They're finishing up the end of a day, and it says, the men of Gibeon quickly sent messengers to Joshua at his camp at Gilgal. Don't abandon your servants now, they pleaded. Come at once. Save us. Help us. For all the Amorite kings who live in the hill country have joined forces to attack us. So Joshua and his entire army, including his best warriors, left Gilgal and set out for Gibeon. Do not be afraid of them, the Lord said to Joshua, for I have given you victory over them. Not a single one of them will be able to stand up to you. God gives this word to him, and he says, if you go, you will win. It says this, verse 9, Joshua traveled all night from Gilgal and took the Amorite armies by surprise. This is the moment before the moment for Joshua. It's the moment before the moment. Joshua's just finished up a whole day. Maybe they were running training exercises, different stuff like this, because it says they were all camped together. And likely, it's the end of the day. They say that at that moment, it was getting dark. And my guess is the guys are sitting around probably building fires, putting up tents, sharpening their swords, getting ready for the end of the day. Maybe guys are already kind of taking the outerwear off, right? They're taking their armor off, and they're like, okay, we're done for the day. And all of a sudden, this man comes tearing down the road out of breath. And he runs up and he slides to a stop and he says, it's happening. You promised that you would have the back of the Gibeonites, and they are attacking right now. Come now or we will be defeated. Come now or we will all be dead by tomorrow. And I need you to get this because this is his moment. All of the circumstances say the day is already done. All of the logic in his mind says, my men are already tired. The horses already have their saddles off. Everything in wisdom in regards to his mind as a commander says, we can't leave now. In fact, the journey from Gilgal to this area of Gibeon was 20 miles away. And not only that, but it was a 3,000-foot incline. It says the shortest distance you could walk this with the group of men that he had was 10 hours nonstop of walking. And in this moment, he had this decision. Do I do what I logically think is like a commander? Like, there's no way we can leave now. My men have already been up for 16 hours. The sun is setting. But then he hears the Lord says, if you go, I promise you not one of them will get away from you. You will defeat them all. And Joshua, in this moment before the moment, makes a decision that I'm sure shocked everyone who was there. He tells all the men, put the saddles back on the horses. Break down the camp, put back on your armor and grab your swords. We're going to march right now. We're going to leave Gilgal right now. We are going to march through the night, and tomorrow morning as the sun breaks 10 hours from now, our enemy is going to be surprised by an overwhelming force already surrounding them when the sun comes up. You see, I need you to get this, okay? That moment of the sun standing still was, I'm sure, the one that he told for the rest of his life of seeing God's faithfulness. But he would have never seen it if he would have just done what was logical in the moment. If he would have coasted back and thought, well, maybe tomorrow we can just come and, God, help the Gibeons, right? Help them. But, I'm tired, so I'll be there tomorrow. I need you to get this. If you want to see the sun stand still, you have to be willing to march all night. If you want to see that kind of miracle in your life, you have to be willing to march all night. Joshua had the men take and put the saddles back on the horse, march 10 hours, start the war as they showed up. The sun started going down. It reached its zenith and started going down. He looked at what had to be done and realized we don't have enough time. And he prays, sun, stand still. And it says it doesn't set for another 24 hours, meaning that Joshua and his men, they basically fought and traveled for 64 hours straight. Friends, I want you to have a faith moment for the rest of your life that you hang your hat on, you point to, you say, I've seen God's faithfulness, but I need you to get this. Hard work for the Lord sets the stage for a miracle. If you say you want to see a miracle, man, I want you to see a miracle, but I need you to get this. Hard work for the Lord sets the stage for the miracle. This is who Joshua was. Joshua was, like I said, one of those two spies who went into the promised land and said he could do it. Joshua was the guy who hiked around Jericho day after day. Joshua's life was marked by hard work. Think about it. Even his prayer in this moment, get his prayer. The prayer wasn't, God, could you just send a little more of that hail to finish off all of our enemies? That would have been a reasonable prayer, wouldn't it? But Joshua was so in the zone of being, my life is about doing what God has called me to do. God said I would defeat them all. So he just says this, could you just hold the sun so I could work hard for another 24 hours? Not you do something miraculous while I'll take a break. He says, would you do a miracle so I could keep grinding and accomplishing the goal that you have for me? It makes me think of this verse in James. Jesus' brother said this, talking about how our faith, when we really get our faith figured out, it just naturally flows into action. Get this, let me just make sure you're always clear. We never earn faith by any of our actions. All of our faith is given to us by grace as a gift by Jesus. But what he's saying is Jesus' brother's like, I've watched this up close. I watched Jesus watch the people around them. As soon as real faith comes, this action just naturally comes out of it. He says this in James 2:17 through 19. You see, faith by itself isn't enough. Unless it produces good deeds, it's dead and useless. Now, someone may argue, well, some people have faith and others have good deeds. But I say, how can you show me your faith if you don't have good deeds? I'll show you my faith by my good deeds. He's like, the actions are what reveal the heart, right? He says, you say you have faith. People are like, they're like, oh, no, I have faith. He says, because you say, like, this is their definition, for you believe that there is one God. And I love James. I'm sorry, he just gets up in their grill right here and he goes this, well, good for you. Even the demons believe this. They tremble in terror. He says, there's all these people who are like, I have faith. He's like, well, what do you mean by faith? They're like, well, I believe God's real. He's like, the devil believes God's real. I think you might be confused on what faith is. Oh, the demons believe God's real. That's not what faith is. He's like, well, what do you mean? And he's like, no. Faith is trusting in God. And he says, when you put your trust in God, when you're on his team, he says, it's crazy. You're not even really focused on it, but he said these works, these great deeds just come out of your life naturally. He says, when I see somebody who says, oh, I have faith, but there's no work at all, he's like, I say, no, you don't. And he's like, well, we're not saved by work. He's like, no, I know you're not saved by work, but if you were saved, there would be work. Do you get it? Do you feel that? He's like, it's natural. It just comes out of that. When you really, really believe in God, this work with your life of trying to use your life to serve the Lord, use your life to build his kingdom, use your life to bring him glory, it just flows naturally. Friends, what work is your faith inspiring you to do? It's kind of interesting because our culture has really embraced the church in general. Just real quick for you, if you want to study back. The church has this tendency, the Christian church, to swing really far between like works justification and grace. And works justification and grace. We always overshoot the mark. We're really bad at that, right? It's like full cold, full hot. Full cold, full hot. And recently the church has really steered into this like, it's just grace. It's just all grace, man. I'm just saved by grace. Everything about me is grace. And you're like, yeah, of course it's grace, but your faith then creates hard work. And if I may, because of our culture, some of you hearing the words faith is hard work, you're like, well, that doesn't sound right. I don't think so. That's not what I was told. I was told you pray the prayer, go to heaven. Done, right? But I need you to get this. Listen what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15:10 when he talks about his own faith, what Paul believed. Get this verse. He says, but whatever I am now, it's all because God poured out his special favor on me. He's like, oh man, everything that I am is a gift from God. But check this out. He says, and it was not without results. Do you see this? He goes, everything I am is because God gifted me. And he goes, but. It didn't stop there. He says there were results from this gifting. There were results from this grace. And here he tells you what the results are. For I have worked harder than any of the other apostles. Yet it was not I, but God who was working through me by his grace. He says, God gave me everything that I have. God saved me. God rescued me. And he says, but that isn't where it stopped. He says, then I worked as hard as I could to give God glory with my life. He's, in fact, I love this. I think it's great. He just says, objectively, looking around, looking at all the apostles, I think I outworked them. I don't think Paul was being pride or arrogant when he said that. I think he's literally just like objectively. Man, I have grinded when others halted. I have worked through the night. I have struggled. I have fought. He tells stories of what his life is. And I mean, it's wild in regards to how much work he put into his faith. But if I may, this is what's interesting. Paul says, I've worked harder than all the other apostles. But you know what else Paul's life was marked with in the new church? More miracles than any other apostle. When we read the story of Acts of the young church, there are miracles throughout the church. But Paul's life is marked by greater miracles than any of them. Interesting, he says, I've worked harder, and then we read his story, and you're like, and you've seen more miracles than anyone. I mean, one time a guy he was teaching a sermon like this, and he just got long-winded, kept teaching. Dude fell out of a window, boom. They said he died. He walked out, put his hand on him, said, come back to life, woke him back up. He's like, you get back inside. I haven't finished my sermon yet. Come back in. I mean, amazing. In fact, get this picture. It says this in Acts 9:11-12. God gave Paul the power to perform, look at this word, unusual miracles. That's a wild word, because miracles in and of themselves are unusual, are they not? He says, no, even for miracles, this was unusual. Even for miracles, this was unusual, what Paul said. Listen to this. He says, when handkerchiefs or aprons that had merely touched his skin were placed on sick people, they were healed of their diseases and evil spirits were expelled. What? Right? He goes, it was crazy about Paul. The miracles were so heavy on this man that he says sometimes like he'd take off his cloak, someone would grab that cloak, and while he was busy preaching, just go and set it on somebody who was sick, and all of a sudden they would feel well. Whoa, right? And it's interesting to think, Paul says what my life was marked by was that once I was saved, man, I worked hard to be able to show God's glory to other people. And his life was marked by unusual miracles. His comment in Romans as he talks to the church, he says this, Romans 12:11, never be lazy, but work hard and serve the Lord enthusiastically. Paul's diatribe to the church, he says this: stop being lazy. Serve the Lord enthusiastically. I love that word, enthusiastically. He's like, not begrudgingly, enthusiastically. He says, you've been saved. So he says, now, man, like, what can I do? I have been given grace that has forgiven my sin, and now I want to do whatever I can to show people how good God is. Listen to me. What if Paul's story, what if the story of Joshua gives us this picture of all of us want these great moments of God's provision into our life, a miraculous provision, but what if in reality, the foundation, the setup for those kind of miracles is hard work? It's hard work directed at God. You know, I think this is actually the big problem. This is actually the big problem right now in the United States of America. We have been suffering from a pandemic for the last few years. A pandemic. Laziness. Laziness. There's been a pandemic going around. It was growing and growing and growing in our country. And then it hit a zenith when we told people they're a hero for staying at home and binge watching Netflix. You're a hero. Like, I feel like a hero. I watched 20 episodes of The Office today. That was pretty heroic of me, wasn't it? In fact, halfway through, I took a break and I posted something on Facebook about what I believe. I really am a hero. I'm changing the world. There is a pandemic of laziness in our culture right now. I'm sorry. I'm right here in the millennial generation. Do you know who dislikes lazy millennials the most? Millennials. Millennials. You think you're like, oh, you're like the boomer who's like, these darn millennials. Let me tell you, even worse is to be one where you look at them and you're like, bro, come on. There is a pandemic of laziness in our culture. We have gotten very, very soft. There is very little that we have to grind against and struggle through because of what our culture has gotten to. But this is what's really, really terrible, friends. It's infected the church. It's infected the church. Our culture has gotten lazy. Nah, I don't want to do that. I just want to stay home and watch Netflix. Nah, I'm not interested in going and do that. I'm just going to stay home and watch TV. Nah, I'm not really interested in being part of that. Nah, I'm not really. And you see all these things changing. Like I said, like clubs and organizations floundering, events that have gone on for literally hundreds of years, can't find enough people to volunteer to be part of them. All these things disintegrating because people are just kind of, nah, I'm not really interested in being part or working or doing any of that. Just kind of that bare minimum. But friends, it's starting to infect the church. And I need you to get this, that although we are saved by grace, we do not earn our salvation in any way. We do not merit it in any way. I need you to get this. The Christian faith is a hard-working faith. Proverbs 13:4 says this: lazy people want much but get little, but those who work hard will prosper. That's the word of the Lord. That's not just a random comment. This is God-inspired wisdom that he asked the proverb writer to write. And he said, lazy people want much but get little. Those who work hard will prosper. He says, this is how I set up the universe. This laziness in our church is chasing away. It's chasing away the impact that the church can have on our community. That people won't leverage their life or work hard to serve the Lord. Or if not laziness then, which really I would say it's just the same thing, the excuse is the word busyness, which really is just a different form of laziness. It's just allocating our time to things of lesser value until we no longer have any time to do something important. Busy, busy, busy. Busy working to buy stuff. Then busy working taking care of the stuff that we bought. Then busy continuing traditions, then busy continuing social interactions, then busy, and just all of these things that are expected of us. I just don't have any time, right? I just don't have any time to serve the Lord. But he says, serve the Lord enthusiastically. I just wonder this. For us who want a miracle, how could God give us a miracle when we're not even living faithfully in our mundane? Like we're not even just using like our regular day-to-day in a productive way to honor God. And then we're like, but God, I want to see a miracle. And God's like, why? Like, man, God, if I could just see like the sun stand still. And he's like, so you could watch a few more episodes of Netflix? God, would you just do a miracle like that of provision? He's like, why? So you could just spend it on more stuff that you're going to throw away in a few more years? Like, I just wonder if God's just like, you don't, friends, I wonder if God's like, you don't even need me to show up and do a miracle. You're not doing anything. You don't need a miracle, right, to just go to work, make some money, spend it. Are you doing anything that requires my supernatural interaction? Because if you're not participating in anything, then why would you need it? I think about when we talk about like our everyday. So often people have these grand ideas of what they would do if they had all the time in the world, what they would do if they had $1 million, what they would do. And it's like, yeah, but what are you just going to do with right now? Well, if I had more time, I would do this for the church. I would do this for the church. I would do this for the church. And you're like, well, but you don't. So what are you going to do with the time you have? How many people have told me, Cameron, you know, if I hit it rich, if I hit that lotto, I'm going to take care of that building for you. We're going to get it paid for. And I was like, I just want $50 today. Everyone just give $50. We could finish buying the rest of the stuff we need. We don't, that's great. I appreciate it. But we have a whole bunch of people. If everyone just gave like $50, we could buy the next few things. We don't need you to win the lotto and wait on that. What are you just going to do right now today? That's what really matters. Matthew 25:29, Jesus tells this parable about these people who are given talents. And listen what he says as the follow-up to this story. He says this, to those who use well what they are given, even more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But from those who do nothing, even what little they have will be taken away. Man. He says, if you leverage whatever you have, don't worry about what someone else has. Don't worry about what someone else believes. Don't worry where someone else is in their faith. He says, if you just leverage what I've given you and think, how can I serve the Lord enthusiastically with what I have? Well, Cameron, you know, if I, and you're like, okay, but you don't. All I have is this. Well, what can you do to serve the Lord enthusiastically with what you have today? Because God's promise is, if you start using well what you've been given, he says, here's my promise. Use well what you've been given. I promise I'll give you more. I promise I'll give you more. Fascinating part is he says those who have and they're afraid, they kind of hold back from God. Like, oh, don't give that, don't give that time, don't give that money, I don't want to be. He says what happens is all of a sudden, even what they have gets stripped away. He says, I'm the one who multiplies what you have if you use it well, excuse me. Are you leveraging what God has already given you? Listen, if you want to see the sun stand still, and I want all of you to have your sun stand still moment, you have to be willing to march all night. That hard work for the Lord is what sets the stage for miracles. You got to do something where you kind of need that miracle to happen, and then you can see it. What if the path? What if the moment before the moment? The reason why some of us have been missing it is because the moment before the moment just looks like hard work. It looks like working really hard on that business. It looks like trying to figure out and move our budget so we can give faithfully. It looks like renegotiating some of our priorities so that we could serve and we could be part of what God's doing. It looks like renegotiating our time so that we can go to our neighbors and we can share the gospel. And you're like, that just looks like a lot of hard work. I would say, yeah. Friends, what if our faith was meant to come with some hard work? You're like, this is going to cost me something. I'm going to have to work this out. And it's like, yeah, isn't that amazing? Isn't that astounding? For the God who rescued you freely by grace, who asked nothing of you to give you forgiveness, wouldn't it make complete sense today to say, so what could I do to give you as much glory with the life I have left? God, you literally redeemed my life. You literally took me away from destruction. Well, now, since I'm not walking in destruction, how can I use this life to serve you? How can I work hard to show people around me how great you are. Friends, I want you to have these moments. Listen, for some of you, the application questions are easy. Think of this in your mind right now. If you're a Jesus follower, here's some of the questions you can ask yourself. Do you serve people around you sacrificially? Do you look for ways you can sacrifice your time to serve the lost? Do you look for ways you can change your schedule so you can share your faith with others? Ask this, do you serve the local church radically, whether this church or another church if you're just visiting? Are you part of a body and then you find ways so that you can serve with that body so that you can accomplish great things in your community? So you can push forward the glory of God inside of your community? Are you working on your faith forcefully? It's interesting when people are students, we expect they're going to have to spend a bunch of time studying. They're going to have to spend a bunch of time working on stuff. And then we kind of get done with school and a bunch of y'all, right? You're just like, cool, done reading books for the rest of my life, right? And it's like, wait a second, man. When we start our faith, this is something we're going to work at. It says actually in God's word to work out our faith. Work out our faith. The idea that you're like, yeah, I need to listen to some more messages and I need to read some of God's word and I need to sit down and talk with some people and develop my own faith. Listen, if you're just exploring your faith right now, you're like, I don't really know if I believe in Jesus. And it's great. Let me tell you, you're not going to earn your faith by anything that you do. It's a gift that's going to be given to you. But if I may, even in your pursuit of figuring out who God really is, don't do it half-heartedly. Do it fully. Say, for this next season, man, I'm going to lean in. I'm going to give God some time. I'm going to be here. I'm going to listen. I'm going to look at God's word and see if this is real. If you're a Jesus follower today, listen, what if you're missing your miracle simply because you've fallen into the trap of lazy Christianity? You've fallen into that trap that's kind of came through the church and you don't work on your faith at all anymore. Let me end by telling you the story. I'm actually going to tell you the story of this guy over the 3 weeks of this series, okay? And his name was William Borden. He was born in 1887 in Chicago to an extremely wealthy family who owned silver mines in Colorado. I mean, the dude literally born with the silver spoon in his pocket, right? His family was from silver. That's a joke. It's funny. He went to Moody Church in Chicago and he started his faith when he was just a young boy. And when he graduated high school at 16 years old, his very wealthy family said, we have a graduation present for you. And they said, it's a year-long vacation around the world. We've literally booked all these different excursions. We have a guide who's going to go with you. And we want you in this next year to see the world. And this is back in like the 1900s, right? Like when this would be insanely opulent. Go and see Asia. Go and see Africa. Go and see Europe. Go and see all these other areas and enjoy it before you start your college career. But it was amazing because when William Borden returned a year later, his friends and his family were startled by who walked through the door. Instead of a man filled with relaxation and pleasure from a vacation, they found a man with a wrecked heart who found a mission. William Borden came back to his family and he said, I know what my calling is. There's a lost world and I am going to go and I'm going to tell them about Jesus. Instead of a year of vacation, it was a year of him realizing, I have so much to do. Someone needs to tell this world about Jesus. He decided instead he would give his life to the mission field. A millionaire kid with everything set up in front of him, rejecting the luxury that was offered to him in order to pursue his calling. In fact, one of his friends at the time literally told him, William, you are throwing yourself away as a missionary. You're throwing away a life that people would dream of. You have all the pleasures of this earth. You have all the finances sitting here, and you're going to leave those things to go and work on the mission field? And it said later on in life when they went through William's Bible, because he wrote these little passages inside of it as he was growing up, at this moment he opened the cover of his Bible and he wrote boldly, no reserves. No reserves. Another translation would be no reservations, as in not holding anything back from God. That I could try to hold on, right, and keep this from God, that I could just try to keep this opulent life I have. And he said, nothing held back, no reserves. I'll give up the lush life I have to go and work hard on the mission field to show people about who God is. Next week, I'm going to tell you the second part of William's story. And let me tell you, it gets even more amazing as we continue forward. You're going to have to come back for it, though. Actually, not next week, 2 weeks from now. So you're really going to be on a cliffhanger. But I want to pray for you as we finish. Would you close your eyes? Would you bow your head? God, I pray that you would inspire in us great faith. I want every person here to experience a sun stand still moment in their faith. A moment they point to and they realize and recognize, I have seen God do the impossible. I know he is real. But God, I pray that you would kill the lazy culture that I think is stealing some of this away. Just this fascination with self and comfort that we have in our American church. Because I just really wonder if so many of us, we're soon coming up to one of these moments, but it's not going to look like a miracle. It's going to look like hard work. And in that moment where our natural human self recoils against the idea of a bunch of hard work, I pray instead that you would touch our hearts and remind us that's what sets the stage for a miracle. If you're doing that hard work pointed at me, to honor me, to show me how much you love me, I promise that's where miracles show up in your life. And draw us into it instead. Instead of recoiling away from it, I pray that you would draw us into that in that moment. And I pray, God, that we would see miracles happen in our lives, miracles happen in our church. Sun stand still moments of provision as we work hard to show this world your glory. No reserves, God, no reserves. In Jesus' name, amen.